Is this number 8? Yes. 8 what? Hmm? Just observe. Number 8. Just observe. Whatever happens, whatever comes up, just observe. But if something comes up, and then you notice you add something onto that, a comment, a question, a criticism, an evaluation, then just observe that. So there's always a little bit of a kind of a backing up, which I mentioned in the previous talk. A little bit of receding just slightly. You can actually feel that. You can feel that when you're talking to someone. If you're listening to what they're saying, there's a little bit of coming forward with your attention, but receding a little bit with your commentary or your reaction to it. You'll notice that automatically. If you're like being threatened, there might be a little bit of receding, just a little bit. You may follow that right up with attacking them. It's possible. But there may be a little bit, you know, just like going back to reload kind of thing. And you can notice that if you're getting ready to do that. We quite often have the habit, and we notice it in ourselves and in others, of actually listening to what they're saying, and since we have a feeling we know where they're going with that, we already know what they're going to say, so we're already planning what we're going to say next. We might even start talking before they're even finished with their sentence. Well, we know what they're going to say. Yeah, I know what you're saying, so this is what I think about that. So I say, you've heard me say before, I'm saying now, wait for the period in that situation when somebody's talking to you. Wait, let the whole thing just kind of drop as if you weren't even going to say anything else. That was the end of the conversation. The person might have more to say. They might dig a deeper hole for themselves that you can fill in with them in it. Not that any of you would do that, of course not. The communication is very much about receiving, very much about just observing what is being said. Not only the voice, the words, the combination of sounds and shapes of sounds and vowels and consonants, or just consonants, as we were talking about earlier. But it's also the person, the way they're holding their hand, the way they're punctuating their words, the way they're moving their body, or not. Clearing their throat, rubbing their eye, squeezing this part. And it's not that that adds up to something. We're not talking about analyzing somebody's body movements necessarily. That's another thing that people sometimes do. It's more about a not knowing what it is, just registering that movement, including that along with what's being said, along with the spaces between their words, the tone of their voice going up and down. That puts you into the entire atmosphere, the entire mandala of the communication. Communication is not about moving knowledge or information from one place to another. That's a very low level of communication. Might be necessary. How many? Coffee, cream, sugar. So there's some information, but when we're talking about relating to others and communicating with others, it's usually quite a bit deeper situation happening. And to receive whatever kind of communication is coming your way from the person you're engaged with, whether it be your spouse or your child or your employer, coworker, just receive what's happening. Just receive what they're saying without necessarily coming back with a comment, a word, a response, an answer to their question. You might want to, even if there is a question, you might want to let them answer it twice or ask it twice. So are you going to answer my question? That kind of thing. So the idea around that is to, whatever's showing up is to allow, not really give so much, but allow as much space around anything that's occurring, to allow as much space as possible, so the clarity with, or in alignment with whatever's being presented to you, or whatever's coming up, whether it's coming from your own consciousness, your own mind, or whether it's coming from apparently someone else talking to you, that the space around that is quite vast, so that your understanding is very precise and clear. Understanding does not necessarily mean that you get it, or you have like an aha thing. Even taking the word understand, what does it mean to stand under? Is that where that comes from? What's the source of that word, understanding? Does anyone know? Word cloud, you know?
I think I would say what you said.
To stand under.
Yeah.
You know, let that be there. So it's very good to look at that and to just observe whatever occurs. There may be more things, it may not just be the big fish, it may be all the pilot fish that are attached to that big fish. There may be a lot more around that coming if you don't draw a conclusion too quickly. It may not even be a fish, it may be a robot, maybe a submarine, maybe a, what was that thing you were thinking about?
Right now.
What was it? Don't say it. Yeah, say it. Don't say it. Say it.
Rubber baby buggy bumpers.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you know that?
I was thinking of a rubber duck, so it's close. Yes, I know, rubber baby buggy bumpers. I slit a sheet. I slit. Upon a slitted sheet I sit. That was my mother's favorite one to try to show me how dangerous it was to say anything at all. So this idea of just observing seems to come in layers, because we kind of assume, well, yes, I'm just observing what's happening, but the observing takes a deeper and more subtle level when we begin to see the kind of a reaction. Something happens and we have a reaction to it, and it seems to be necessary then, rather than add on to the reaction, is to actually just observe the reaction and see that that's not so much spontaneous, but it's like an impulse. It's like we perceive something, we have an impulse about it that quite often is about protecting ourselves, or quick finding out what that is, or finding out what that means so we don't feel lost. Like you were saying earlier, I feel confused, and I'm saying, good. I wouldn't say that to someone who never meditated. If they said, I feel confused, I would say, well, what's going on? I would talk about it. But in your situation, someone who meditates several hours every day, and has been doing it for years, you say you're confused, I would say, good. And why do I say not because I'm happy you're confused? Of course not. If I could stop that or take that away, that confusion, I would certainly do it, as anyone would. What I'm saying is, that's probably how it's going to feel as you proceed to go more and more deeply into your conscious mind and towards what's in the West is called an unconscious, and what we call the alaya, or the storehouse consciousness. As you begin to approach that, there can't be a turning around at the base, as is conventionally described, unless you go towards it. So this is why I think I mentioned it to you, rest in the nature of alaya. Maybe I mentioned it to someone else today too. Alaya is the storehouse of consciousness. So, and to rest in that is to find, through meditation practice, find as deep a level as you can, which is not going to have too many thoughts floating around. But there may be some, but it's more or less the spaciousness of that, and just rest there. Quite often feels like, to the ego mind, it feels like you're not getting anywhere. Well, this can't be working. I feel like nothing's happening. So there again, we get tied into the presumption. There's a little bit of an addition onto that. I feel like nothing's happening. I think I'm not getting anywhere. It's called spiritual materialism. There's nowhere to get. You can say that. I can write a book so thick and call it, there's nowhere to get meditation. Probably sell a lot of copies of that. As I said, or as I've said, I'm saying now, if it's a good book, just read the title. Like with my book, A Meditation Primer. Got it. There was somebody on the internet recently that I think of who it is. Someone was just saying, meditate, you should meditate. It doesn't matter how, just meditate. There's thousands of books on meditation. Find one, read it, and meditate. That's a pretty broad spectrum there. Probably better than not meditating. So for each person, the idea, the recommendation to just observe is going to show up differently. So say, to pick on you a little bit more, to your situation, because you meditate a lot every day, what is going to happen is that could be that idea that I'm confused, or nothing much is happening, or ho-hum, or where is this going, it just seems like nothing much is happening. Just observe that. So it's just about just continue, but as you observe it, notice if there's any addition to it, like this is not getting anywhere, or this is confusing. All of that is extra. And so how do we work with that? We don't try to stop that. We just observe that. So just observe whatever is happening. It's called meditation. It's called discipline. It's called, well, meditation works. It's called meditation. Questions?
Is there a difference between just observe and awareness?
So the awareness, there may be less activity as far as doing something. You're just more or less on receive. You're just aware. If you're just aware, then there's no credential around it. You don't really know if you're aware particularly. But if you're moving this way or that way, or coming to any kind of conclusion, or anything you're doing, then that's where you need to observe. If you're just aware, then you're probably not going to miss much. That eventually happens of its own. It isn't something that you do, even though I might say just be aware. I also know that involves seeing how we keep distracting ourselves into this, or we get wound up in some kind of a discursive story, some soap opera. A metaphor I sometimes use is a stage, and we were talking about that. It's like you think this is ridiculous, and if you think this is ridiculous, you're no longer on the stage. You're in the first row thinking, this is not real. This is a play. But part of you is still on stage. This is called schizophrenia. To most people it is, but to us it's not. It's awareness. It's awareness that divides and separates, divides, adds, subtracts, does all kinds of math. And what I'm saying as a teacher and what you're doing as a student, or should be doing, is just awareness. It's just about awareness. There's nowhere to get. There's nowhere to leave. Sit down, hold still, and the metaphor of the stage and the acting and so on works for you, then you can use that. You can notice how, well, sometimes I even say, just go to the front row and watch what's happening. Watch who's directing, who's blocking this, where the actors are standing, who's standing where. And it gets to be confusing. Especially when the identity can move around so easily. Can move to the front row. Then back in character again. And then back out and then back in. And then jumping from one character to the next, or changing positions or masks or evaluations. That's a very tiny example. There's some study on that.
Helene gave it to us.
Helene.
Remember?
I remember Helene. Yeah, she wasn't very big. She was only about that big.
Her kids sat on that.
They did. Oh. How many does she have now?
2 the last I talked to her.
Good for her. Kids are good. Further questions about just observe?
We hear the words mindful often. What's the difference between just observing and be mindful?
I don't know. Mindful. You're going to spell it with consonants or put some vowels in there. So I don't really. They're just words. And so, we have so many words. What we were talking about Vajrasattva and Samantabhadra, and there's just so many words, and they designate some aspect of the Buddha nature. Mindful is to be mindful is just to be aware, basically. And it's, quite often the way that it's taught is different. Some, S.N. Goenka taught Vipassana, which probably hundreds of thousands of people have practiced, just because he became quite famous with all of his prison work in India. Some of you maybe have seen that video. Anybody seen the video of his work? And the reason that had brought such relief to the inmates there in their 10-day solitaire, or their group retreat with eyes closed and everything, as mindfulness practice, Vipassana, is because it's such a contrast to what was happening in their minds before. But it only goes so far. It won't really solve. I'm not saying it won't, but it's less likely to solve the fundamental issue, which is mistaken identity. They were quite grateful to be introduced to something where they could sit down and do nothing but start to experience their minds coming and going, coming and going. So at the end of the movie that I saw, the documentary that I saw, they were all hugging him and sobbing and weeping, and they were quite moved. But that's just the beginning. Then you have to actually go deeper rather than just have a good experience of self-discovery. So the word mindful is all over the place. The thing that is not mentioned so much, a little, is how much work it's going to take. It's going to take a lot of work. Not guaranteeing that. It might be quicker. But the fundamental issue or mistaken identity is that there is someone. And as long as there is a grasping at a self, no matter how subtle, then anything that comes up is going to be happening to that self, or coming to that self, or leaving that self, or frustrating that self. There's going to be someone who feels a certain way. It's much different than having an emotion that comes through that can't find an owner, can't find an emoter. That might be a better word. Can't find someone who feels like that. The feeling is there. You recognize the feeling. It's anger, frustration, sadness, depression, or all kinds of words, but it can't find anyone, so it can't stay. So it might be a flash. It might be 30 seconds. It might be 3 hours. But there's no demand for it to leave. There's no justification for it to stay. So it's just causes and conditions that are have free reign with this particular manifestation of a human being. It's called liberation. And what you're liberated from the attachment to a self, the attachment to other, the attachment or the clinging to anything. Success, failure are no longer operative. Even life and death no longer operates in the same way. Sure, we know someone's body comes apart or dies, and because that was the vehicle through which they communicated, talked, listened, and so on. We can't find them anymore. But if you go in the other room, there they are. If you don't know what I'm saying, you should ask questions. If you go downstairs and sit on the couch now, what happens to us?
You're still up here.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
That was my question. I wanted you to say more.
Yeah, say more. And if you come back up here we are again. Just like when you die, there they are. They left last year, you leave this year. What doesn't appear can't disappear. It's just a way of talking about it. It's kind of screwy in a way because it doesn't take into consideration the materialistic level. But we're doing that constantly. I'm over here, you're over there, my coffee's here, my water's there, I'm here, there's my wife, there's all my friends. It's very simple.
When we're endeavoring to just observe, does it matter so much what shows up in that? Whether we're adding or not adding?
Say that again? You're talking about you're adding something or not adding something? Something that shows up that came from outside or something that shows up that came from you? Is that what you meant?
I think so.
No, other than you might notice that. You might notice that something happens and you're adding something onto it, or something happens and you're not adding anything onto it. Same. Why is it the same? There isn't anyone. Whatever happens is just part of dependent origination. It's not someone has done something. It's like in the teachings they sometimes talk about a person with no status. Just like no something that happens has no so a thought has no ontological status. It's not a thing. Has no status to it. I mean, if it does, then what? How about what you thought last week, Thursday at 2 o'clock? Where did that go? At the time, it was like that thought gone. More?
If the content doesn't matter so much, can we ever not observe?
Paraphrase that.
What is it to not observe?
To ignore. To observe is to be aware. Sometimes it's a specific, just observe. You're in the middle of, you're in some kind of a tango, and you're actually able to return to some kind of a simple approach, which is just observe that. You might even be lecturing yourself on some level. So you're tangled up in something and you with someone or some situation, and you could just observe that. Just slow down, and just observe what's happening. And it may not come up as some kind of result of how well I'm doing just observing, but it just reduces some of that kind of spinning crazy energy around it. Did you have raise your hand? Yeah.
Earlier you used the word spontaneity or spontaneous, and sometimes we use that word in the teaching as opposed to impulsivity. So if everything is dependently arisen, it seems like what wouldn't be spontaneous? What's the difference between spontaneity and impulsivity?
So impulsivity is a reaction to something that is occurring. Perception, impulse, form, feeling. Perception, impulse is the third skandha. So we perceive something and we react to it. We add something to it. We take something away from it. We add, we subtract, we divide, we separate ourselves from it based on hope and fear, based on an independent individual, an assumed or imputed individuality that is either benefiting from this impulse or afraid of this impulse or wants nothing to do with this impulse. Whereas spontaneity would be actually, to use the more pictorial representation, would be dancing with that. It would be not separating yourself from it, not joining it, but working with that energy. How the energy rises, you just work with that energy. Dancing seems to be a good image for that. It's like, because sometimes things arise that are wild and crazy, and sometimes all you can do is stay on the sidelines, which would be a way of just appreciating the dance. Maybe you can't join in. Maybe there's too much energy, too much spinning. The person is too insane or too crazy, or that situation is too crazy. You might have to just sit in the front row or the back row and just watch and see if there's bring your awareness, have your awareness there, just observe in the situation, because nothing lasts. Eventually it might tip this way, that way, and this way, and then it might open right up where it's right like a red carpet right in front of you. It's time for you to join that. And if there's a strong ego connection which operates out of hope and fear, you won't be able to do that. You might see it, but you think, I'm not going there. That could be dangerous. But when one is operating out of awareness, the hopelessness is the way it could be described, and the fearlessness is the way it functions. So the hopelessness isn't a negative thing, it's just that you're not operating out of hope. You're not operating out of hope for something better. You're not concerned with something better. What are you concerned with? In our lineage, it's be with all things. Whatever happens, you're there. You're there to stay on the sidelines, and if the causes and conditions that arise in such a way, you're ready to go in and join and bring your paintbrush. And you're ready to immediately, as soon as you get in there, realize it's not time for me to do this. You might not say that, but you might just go back and sit in the front row again. Just using that as a metaphor. If you're functioning out of awareness, there is no someone who's failing or not being included, or so sometimes I say to people, if they don't feel like they're being included, I say, well, include yourself, especially when it comes to Sangha. Don't include yourself. No one's going to not include you, and if they are, then punch them. No, don't punch them. But I mean, go ahead and, it's not egotistical or self-centered. It doesn't even matter if it is, to go in and say, I want to be part of this. I want to know what this is, and then whoever's running this could say, you can't. We got too many people already. Just go away, and we'll call you later. So then you would have to relate to that. So it's changing all the time. Does that make some sense on some level? Any question about that? Juju.
In the talk this morning, you were talking about if someone's coming at you, maybe aggressively. I think you said stay with the things that aren't so threatening, like gravity or smells or something like that. What is it about someone's voice that is more threatening than another sense field?
Well, it could be the tone of the voice, which is, expressive. There's someone's growling at you or something. Then there's a lot of things go along with that. You've been conditioned to respond to that kind of thing. But also a person saying something, they're bringing you into your own thinking process. You can't just be objective about the thinking process if someone's talking to you and maybe threatening you or accusing you. Very difficult. But if you can include the rest of your senses, which are not doing that. Your gravity's just holding you here. Your clothes are just clinging to you or whatever, and the colors of the walls don't change. The sound of the fan, or the blower, or the air conditioning, whatever it may be, or the person's voice. Just listen to the voice go up and down rather than imputing something that it means this or means that. And this doesn't get rid of the possible threat, but it softens it up so that you're present for that, so you're able to work with whatever's happening rather than you all what's it called, congeal. You congeal into a being who is threatened and can't feel anything, can't hear anything, can't smell anything, taste anything. Those senses are gone because you're just freaked out and paranoid, and you want to get out of here, or you want to lash out or something. So.
Is the feeling of being threatened, if it feels like it's coming from that person's voice or their words, is all of that just what we're adding to it?
A little of each. You're adding something, but something's coming from that direction also. It's very mutual. The whole thing is very mutual. The way I teach is very mutual. If I don't have any students, I don't think of myself as a teacher. The only time I think of myself as a teacher, if I have a student. if a student moves to Utah, I'm kind of screwed. I got to go back to picking potatoes. You know what I mean? No, you don't. I'm just saying it's much more mutual than we think. The whole situation with our government right now is there's a lot of blame going up the hill. It's not that there's not something amiss there, but there's so many structures, causes, and conditions that create that kind of craziness where all these people are out of work, and so it's a pretty sad thing to think about. But it's dependently arisen. There's no blame on any level. I mean, it's not that you can't find somebody that did this, that did that, but then who did what to them in 1932? I mean, they were alive that long. There's just no way to track it all down. That's why it's so important to cooperate, communicate, collaborate, so we all, what's the image for that? All boats rise, or all boats sink, that's right, at the same time. That we drain the water away and then all the boats hit bottom and then there's no threat. Because there aren't any more boats, there's just pea pods. More? Pea pods? About pea pods? World peas? World peas, that's right. Whirled peas. Is that what you're going to talk about? Go ahead, please.
I forgot.
Good. That's one way to trick you. It's very hard to see, it's very easy to see blame, because it's tit for tat. This did that, that caused that, he said this, they did this, oh, I was just doing this, but then you did that. It's very easy to go, 3 minutes back in time and blame that person for doing that. It's just, we're not saying that that's not there, but it's just it's just we're looking through a keyhole into reality. We're just seeing everything as we're living our whole life in through this little keyhole of our little world, instead of saying it's a vast spaciousness that is. The traditional word is maha, or maha vipassana, great panoramic awareness. Yes.
If we're feeling threatened or afraid, how can we just receive that?
I think just practicing to don't add anything to the fear. Don't try to get rid of the fear. Don't try to get rid of the threat. Don't lecture yourself about I shouldn't be afraid. Be afraid. Be genuine. Actually feel whatever's happening to you. Feel that. Don't jump into explanations about it or blaming anyone or blaming yourself. Insofar as you can. And the more you do sitting meditation, the more you'll be able to do that, just because less is better. There's just less vasanas or habit energies coming out of what we call the alaya vijnana, the habit energy that's been loaded up there year after year, decade after decade, century after century after century of cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. Awareness of beings coming and going and coming and going, of which right now you're one of them. Go ahead.
How can we just receive, or can we just receive, if at the same time we want to get rid of that feeling?
Just receive that. Just receive not liking it. You're not okay with it. That's just the second noble truth. Wanting things to be different than they are. You're actually working with the Buddha's teaching when you're looking at that. And it's not about getting rid of that. That's a misunderstanding about suddenly being a peaceful person. I used to be really upset, but now I'm really peaceful. It's circular. I mean, if you do that, it might work for 3 months, 8 months. It could work for 10 years. But all it takes is one emotional tsunami to come wrong and knock you right out of your proverbial meditation seat. There's no goal to accomplish. If you accomplish a goal, even though Buddhism is taught as attaining enlightenment, it's not an attainment. As it says in the Diamond Sutra, that it's, can you quote it? Can you quote a line of that?
One of them, it says a statement about something is not a statement about something, therefore
it's a
you can
statement.
say it.
Yeah, so it's a way of working with relativity and ultimacy in a very relative sutra that was written, who knows, back in the 3rd or 4th century, probably, maybe earlier. That's part of the, actually it's earlier than that, it'd be in the first, about the first, 2nd century BC, Prajnaparamita literature. That's the Diamond Sutra, Vajracharika Sutra, the diamond cutter. And what does it cut? It cuts through duality. It cuts, you would think that if it cuts through duality that it would leave 2 pieces. But no, it cuts through the two-ness, which is another word for tunic. It's very,
Can wanting things to be different be spontaneous?
yeah. We want this, we don't. If it starts to snow, oh, I don't want it to snow. Or if it doesn't snow, we want to go skiing. It's snowing. Blink, blink, blink.
When does that wanting things to be different look like the second noble truth kind of desire?
So I think it's personal for each person, but it's you're in any situation you're in, you just don't want that. So you very simple one that's difficult to deal with is you wake up in the morning and you sit up in bed, or maybe you don't, you lay there in bed and you, without any reason at all, you feel depressed or bummed out, or you're just laying there and you just kind of that feeling of maybe not wanting to live, or maybe it might not be that intense, but it might be something like, why even go on? This is just, yeah. So, if someone has that kind of situation, then I would say then you work with that where it's at. The way we work with it is to, one of the ways that I recommend if someone has a lot of that going on, where there's just a low level of emotion that just causes us to sink, say recite the first of the 4 reminders. First, contemplate the preciousness of being free and well favored, because we tend to go into that feeling it gets a hold of us, and we just, maybe you haven't had that, but I certainly have years ago, and it was difficult. So I just kind of encouraged myself to keep going.
Can endeavoring to stay with just the surface of a negative feeling draw us into that, into believing it?
You're going to have to ask that question in a different way. I think I know what you're saying, but I want to make sure that I don't respond to a question you're not asking.
Seems easy to fall into some kind of ideal about that teaching, but staying with the texture.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were saying. Okay, so no, there's no danger. No, you should just recite it anyway, because nothing lasts. So your recitation, even though it seems like the same, this is why they do hundreds of thousands of prostrations and mantras, is nothing remains the same. So when you do something 100,000 times, you see how that, you've not even been doing the same thing over and over again. You think it is, you think you're going to have to do that. Well, that's you can't repeat anything. So therefore, concentrate on that first reminder to look at that, look at on the way I teach it, or you may have heard me talk about it. Look at the very first word first. Don't immediately go with the whole thing. Look at the word first. What does that mean? First. As soon as before you open your eyes, first. Might take a few weeks. First, contemplate. What? Contemplate. Think about, look at, turn it over, look at both sides of it. Look it up in the dictionary. Contemplate the preciousness. What does preciousness mean? Is that a relative term? Is it an ultimate term? Can you have your way with that word? Can you make it this way or make it that way? First, contemplate the preciousness of being free. Free to do something, free not to do something, free from something. What does free mean? I mean, for yourself, not some kind of, the dictionary could have something to do with it, but it has to be your own understanding. Free and well-favored. Well-favored is that you are born into a body-mind complex, this particular human being, that is not so waterlogged by opinions and ideas and beliefs and enculturation, that you can actually less cultural wax in your ears. You can actually hear somebody say something a little bit different. Like, you could train your mind. You could see what is true for yourself. You could actually live without any opinions at all. It's possible. This doesn't mean that some kind of bias doesn't come and go, but you just watch it. More?
Another question came up from what you were saying. How can we trust ourselves if we're unsure of who that is?
If I came over there and hit you, you'd trust yourself.
What do you mean?
You know what I mean. You're saying, how can I trust myself? Who put this Roxo on? That one. Who put that one on?
This one?
Who put it on? Did you put it on a little while ago? You did it. So trusting yourself isn't exactly trusting some kind of idea about who you are. You're just not separate from who you are. It's just this. You're not separate from the Roxu, you're not separate from the vow, you're not separate from your laundry soap, you're not separate from the washing machine, you're not separate from me, you're not separate from that bowing mat, you're not separate from that candle, you're not separate from Junshu, you're not separate from the fan that's moving. Not separate, not separate, not separate. So there isn't anyone to trust. Trust is extra. Just don't object to it. I'm not going to hit you. Did I hit people very much? No. See? I've got a pretty good memory, so I'm not sure if I whacked anybody or not. I don't think so. The only reason I'm saying that is just it's a way of changing gears. If I came over and hit you, this is why if you read the teachings, you'll see where some teachers, it's just a metaphor, it's an example. Probably nobody hit anybody, or maybe they did, but it's just like the teaching person might get frustrated with somebody and just like Naropa or Tilopa did with Naropa. After 12 years of finding a teaching that, Tilopa's like, this guy's the worst student I've ever had. Takes off his sandal, and then the next time Naropa asks a question, what is the fundamental nature of reality, Tilopa? Probably didn't make that sound. That's more like a mokugyo. And it's just an example. I'm not saying that couldn't happen, but it's unlikely. It's just that sometimes there needs to be that kind of a shock or that kind of a. So that's why everything that happens to you in your life, everything that is negative that comes up, rather than try to get rid of the negativity, look at it as a Dharma gate, as a way that you could say, relatively deepen your understanding of what this world is about. Further questions? Well, cool. Oh. Yes.
When we were talking about perception impulse.
Yes.
And it's often, the phrase is heard sometimes turning about, perception only.
Perception.
So in the context of perception impulse, would it be perception without the impulsivity?
Just perception without a self, perception without not hooked up to feeling, the second skandha, not hooked up to the fourth skandha or concepts, just perception, just form, just feeling, perception, just concept, just thinking, no thinker, just thinking, just consciousness, no one that's consciousness of the six sense fields and their objects, no persona that is imputed or brought into some kind of imaginary space to be protected or advanced. So yes, there wouldn't be any. The impulse is about the reaction to grasp or reject or run away or something, and then that's supported by the concepts about it, which comes in just immediately and names it. It's because it's this or it's that. And the feeling might arise before that or after that. kind of could work any direction more.
So the impulse is related to the energy of grasping a self,
Yeah,
like an unseen.
perception impulse. We all experience that. You see something and something else comes up about it. Get rid of it or get more of it. Or who cares? Yes.
So if the impulse is that impulse to jump from this to it's a cup
Yes.
or whatever is conditioned or dependently arisen,
Yeah.
then how can it not jump to the impulse if it's choiceless?
You have to see it. You have to see that you do that, and if you see that you do that, you can just not do it. But you have to see the entire thing. And one of the things that I teach in opening the eye mind is akin to that. It's pretty hard to do opening the eye mind unless you're a meditator, but you can get a glimpse of what it's like to see without thinking, to see without the thought process coming up and trying to help you with what you're seeing. Define it, look at it. So it's just separating that out, giving that a little bit more space so you can just see. Just like with writing poetry, it's like it has to do with hearing. A lot of people, I think that it's just about words alone. So of course it is, but it's also about the sound of that, how that this word and then that word, how do those sound together? How do they, and then visually how that shape, the lowercase b has a big bubble on it. Should you put a dash there or a period? Should you do anything with it? You really need to, and I know that what little I've done, which is nowhere near, say, what someone like Fleet or maybe others have done with that, is if you're going to go in and create something, there's a whole lot of editing has to happen. It's not just splash things, like whoever did that thing, just splash things up there. Walk away. No, wait, I didn't sign my name there. Sign my name, walk away from it. Same thing with cooking. I'm not a cook, I don't cook well at all, but it seems like that would have to do with shape and color and sound and smell and everything involved with that to really do that in a way that is creative, so that you're actually using the very creativity that shows up all around us, not just as human beings, but everywhere, to tie into that energy and realize that all you're doing is helping nature do what it was doing without your help. Are you leaving? You never coming back ever?
I'm coming back.
Oh, good. Yes.
One more question. Do you Oh my goodness!
Is that what I think it was?
It didn't
Boa
come out.
constrictor.
It's just waiting to.
Oh, it's
Pre-fart.
pre-fart? Pre-fart, okay.
You said, as it regards turning around at the basis, first you have to turn and look at the alaya. And you say meditation is a way to observe that. But you do deep consciousness work, we've done dream practice. Is there any other ways to, if you want to see what's there, look, besides just sitting?
Well, there's all kinds of ways, so I'm not limiting, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking me. Yes, we go every direction we can. So there's no limitation. I'm not sure. It's like a flower arranging and doing brush and ink awareness practice, doing deep consciousness work, doing something I've wanted to do, we just haven't gotten to it yet, is doing writing, getting together in a group and doing different exercises you can do that are quite interesting. I don't know, writing down phrases. Everybody writes down a phrase, you put them in the center on a piece of paper, and then you collect them, and then you read them all one after another. It's fun. Words. It's just a matter of working with consciousness and with all the ways the mind works in as many ways as we can. Using this, we use astrology, we use the Enneagram, we use, if you want to go in and study it, the I Ching is very valuable, very complicated, but it's a very valuable book that's 10,000 years old, as far as we know. Not to mention all the things we study, eight times a week, different texts we study. So I'm very much about going as many directions as we can, and at the same time spending a lot of time just looking at your own mind, what's happening in your own mind. More? Anyone else? Yes?
Sometimes it, I forgot how I put this as a question. I guess I can't make it into a question.
Then I can't make it into an answer. Because we're kind of at the end of our rope. Further questions from anyone? You have a question? You were going to have a question.
I know.
What was that question?
Kind of goofed.
You don't remember what it was? You said, well, I'm going to ask you that. No, I said you should ask me that.
I should ask you why do we even do this?
Yeah, okay. And then I'm going to give you the mudra. Are you ready? And then the mantra, and which you can do 100,000 times. Don't do that. We do it to train our mind. We do it to see more clearly. We do this so we won't fight with our world. That's why. Thank you for the question. Further questions? Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming up.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
Thank you for inviting us.